Hey everybody, what's going on? Welcome back to another video. Hope you guys been enjoying the content channel as of late. It is a bright Friday morning. Beautiful weather out right now. I have one of my kitties just chilling out. I'm taking notice of how relaxed he is right now. Um, but we're back to another video for today. Immediately talking more about this whole deal because there's a lot of information that's out there. I literally did some notes, just kind of documenting the whole thing that's been happening right now. And I kind of wanted to be a little more specific because in the last video, of course, we talked about the uh, the just the deal itself, and my overall feelings about it, and then some things circling around it. But I wanted to get into details now about the impact of this decision and what could happen in the future with relating to everything that's happening with Netflix, how their mentalities might be, and all the other things that have to take into consideration for the next couple of years. Because let's just be upfront about this. First and foremost, this is something that is going to take a couple years to get done because of the economics and a lot of the legality, which we're going to get into in a sec. But I want to kind of chronicle and give you guys, just everything that's been happening because there's a lot of information out there, and just for me personally, just for my own documentation, just so I have it archived so I can look back on it. This is how everything's been going forward with this whole deal. Just understanding all the things that are happening on the inside and how everything's may be translated in the future, just so we all get an understanding of where things are at. So so let's just start off with some of the stuff that we've already discussed. So we know, of course, we're currently that Netflix has acquired Warner Brothers Pictures, specifically certain assets in the company. They've got their studio and streaming businesses. So they have Warner Brothers Studios and they have HBO Max, or at least currently that is the idea. A deal that has been made for $82.7 million, or billion dollars, I must say. And in the bidding process itself, what led up to this, um, just so we understand the bids themselves, um, Netflix, and I'll be looking down on my notes just so you know. Um, Netflix made a deal for certain assets, right, as we illustrated. That didn't include any of the global networks division, the other part of their company, because for those who don't know, before this whole thing came into play, this whole idea of selling themselves off to another company, Warner Brothers was in the stages of actually splitting themselves into two, and they're still doing that because they want to be able to relieve themselves of some sort of debt. So they're still planning that out, and they've split themselves into two, between one of which being their studio and streaming divisions, and their other parts being their global networks, basically their like televised stuff, like the Food Network stuff and their news broadcast mediums, all that stuff. That's just now a separate company entirely, which is essentially in some ways liquidating and relieving themselves of some kind of debt. Um, so, and providing pressure to that company to find their way to make it work on their own. Um, but that's the thing about Netflix, though, is that they went for certain kinds of assets. Now, the other competitors in this race was, of course, Paramount Pictures. Now, with Paramount, they want the whole company, the whole 9 yards. They wanted the whole every division there, and they made a bid for, I believe it was $25 a share, which was mostly an all cash deal. Then Netflix came in with a $28 per share, all mostly cash deal, and within the bidding process, Paramount had actually made 3 attempts during the whole process, which was actually the motivation to actually having Warner Brothers pursuing a sale in the first place. Because, as we said up front, they were originally just going to split themselves into two. They weren't even considering doing a sale at all. It was only until Paramount actually got themselves involved and started flirting with the idea of WB that, hey, maybe if we just buy you out entirely, that some of these problems can be solved. And that's what motivated WB to just decide to sell themselves off. Now, Paramount was very adamant on getting Warner Brothers, as it's illustrated through those 3 attempts, and uh, they they took the opportunity. They saw what Warner Brothers was doing, trying to split themselves into two. So they took the opportunity to try to make bids, even though the sale at the time wasn't necessarily happening. But then things started moving along, and then a few months later, and now the sale is real. And then now other companies were getting themselves involved. And then Paramount noticed a few days ago that Netflix was the favorite in the race. And as a result of that, they decided to send WB a few letters talking about some concerns over the fairness in the process, the whole fairness within the bidding process, and uh, the subtle suggestion of legal action if the merger were to occur. If Netflix ends up taking Warner Brothers, legal action might actually be in the books. Now, it's important to note that Paramount, it seems, may in fact have the backing of the Trump administration, because we've talked about, obviously, with Rush Hour 4, the reasoning behind that development and why that exists at all. And Paramount, supposedly, as far as I've looked into a video, it was Dan Murrell's video I saw online, where he talked about this, that apparently Paramount's visited the White House, at least their CEO, the Pacific family who runs the Paramount Pictures. They may, in fact, be good with Trump administration. And the reason why we bring this up is because if Paramount is going to be pursuing legal action, that provides them some sort of leverage in legal battles against the company, whether it being Netflix or Warner Brothers. And that's where things can get really ugly. That's where things can, as like Dan Murrell said, like things can get very ugly. And that's where things can get very, very slippery in terms of this acquisition, the legitimacies behind this, and ultimately if maybe this thing doesn't come to pass, um, but but that's to be seen. Again, that's years down the line. We just are just now hearing about this, so things are all in development right now. But during the bidding process, separate from the studios, there was a collection of producers and filmmakers who actually wrote a letter, an anonymous letter, namely because they don't want to be seen a certain way and probably want to do business with Netflix in the future. Just saying. They're like, we're not doing this out of cowardness or whatever like that. We're just doing it because of fears towards Netflix's regime or whatever like that. It's like, stop it. It's just because you guys want to be able to have work with that company. I'm just saying. Um, so they actually wrote a letter to Congress to a couple of politicians, both from the left and the right, uh, looking for support to help fight the this impending acquisition from Netflix. And they cited concerns of like the downfall of theatrical distribution, like what could happen there, and a lot of the heavy favoritism in the streaming marketplace, because now Netflix will also be acquiring HBO Max, which we talked about in the video I did yesterday. That also is a very questionable variable. What's going to happen there with that? There's a good chance that the two just merge together. Maybe HBO Max just slowly fades and then just gets swallowed up by Netflix. Who knows? Who knows? But essentially, though, the market will be a little bit more heavily not favored, but Netflix will have more of a higher stake in that marketplace compared to other companies currently, which I've said was also going to apply to anybody who was going to acquire Warner Brothers anyway. If Paramount got a hold of Warner Brothers, that same sentiment would be given. Um, I get it because Netflix is one of the biggest. I get it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that um, that this mentalities are all of a sudden, different between the two. It's like, no, like you're still going to reap the same benefits. So I just don't understand why Netflix gets a more criticism on that front. It's just it was going to happen regardless. Someone was going to get more of a stake or more of a place in the market. But that happened. So they were sending out a letter. Now, following the announcement of the acquisition, a few things have happened. Two things actually. One of which was a responses from all the major unions, the WGA, the PGA. I don't know if the DGA also. I don't know if SAG has responded yet. I don't think that they have. Maybe if they have, I'll leave it here somewhere. But majority of them have came out and they unanimously have expressed concerns over this deal, and they've expressed concerns over some of the repercussions toward their business. Wage reductions, job eliminations, all that sort of stuff. Specifically, I think WGA said stuff like that. Um, DGA, as far as I know, they're actually looking to have meetings with, I think, with Netflix to talk about stuff. Um, but I mean, that part was also going to happen regardless. I mean, in acquisitions and, with transitioning to merging the companies into two, there's going to be cutbacks, there's going to be layoffs. That's just the unfortunate side of business, that stuff like that occurs. So, you know, um, there's no really much of a control in that way, in that place. When you merge two companies together, some things are going to be eliminated in order for this whole thing to make sense. Otherwise, you're going to have aspects within that company that don't feel as important or as valuable anymore now that you have these two companies working together. So, but following the announcement also of the acquisition, and this is the important thing to talk about, which kind of gets into the whole impact. We're laying out the groundwork, but this is kind of the important thing. Um, Netflix, upon announcing that they acquired Warner Brothers, they had suggested that because the main question, obviously, about Warner Brothers and bringing on Warner Brothers Studios is what is going to happen with the theatrical slate, and that's what's getting a lot of people mostly negatively. A lot of people are seem to be pretty against this decision. Either that being by Netflix's model, how they choose to release things, either in a political manner. I've seen some political stuff, people saying like, yeah, don't go for Paramount because Trump's there and stuff like that, which we have talked about is legitimate. I mean, he has partaken in decision makings in this field, and that can also be used as leverage in court if they decide to pursue legal action. Paramount, at least. But Netflix has suggested that the current slate at Warner Brothers, any current plans at Warner Brothers right now in their film department, will in fact see a theatrical release. But future releases, things that are not planned out from the company, those may change to compensate for their subscriber base. So what they say is consumer friendly models that they might be looking into in the future, which is essentially talk saying that they are maybe looking for models that will benefit their subscription service as well as a theatrical medium, which gets me worried that we might be getting back into what I talked about in the last video, a theatrical or a same day release model, which I do not want. And we have heard rumors about, or we had heard yesterday that a part of that meeting may have been talking about, um, a 2-week release strategy in theaters and then dumping it on streaming. Some people have disputed that claim, and that may not be true. I would hope that's not true. I think that that's just ridiculous. Um, but that is all that we know so far. That is all that we know so far about the acquisition, about how the acquisition came to be, and potentially where things are going. So there's two things, very important things about this deal right now that we have to consider. There is, of course, the repercussions when it comes to theatrical distribution. When it comes to Warner Brothers, what happens with their films? Do they end up having a large theatrical release model, or does that model get shortened in order to compensate for a subscriber base? Because we are talking about a streaming service after all. this isn't another studio like Paramount. This is Netflix. This is a streaming platform. They have risen and fostered in a community and a subscriber base, and that's where they mostly get their money from, is that from subscriber base. And they've been trying to branch out into theaters, but a they've not had any successful models yet for that front. They've not had valuable IP. They've not had things that they can use to to bolster up that kind of market or to cement themselves in that kind of market. Now they do. They have Warner Brothers. And at least if you ask me, if you were to talk about yesterday, or if you saw my video yesterday, I suggested that you use that slate, that IPs that you're about to inherit, and use that as your basis for a theatrical model and for a theatrical experience, and to use that as your gateway into the theatrical market, at least to me, you know. Um, but but that's the first thing, is the mentalities over at Netflix. What is their MO when it comes to Warner Brothers? Are they going to do what they normally do, which is to just have short release models and release windows and then just put it on streaming? Are they going to do a same day release strategy, or are they going to go for a longer release window for these major tentpoles and expand out their business into a theatrical medium as well? There's a lot of uncertainty on that front, but those are the ideas of that as well, in that respect. The other side of that is the legal side, because as I've illustrated, we have Paramount Pictures who may or may not sue Netflix or Warner Brothers. I forget who they. I think it's Netflix, presumably, that they want to sue. Um, and you have the backing of the Trump administration that could tip the scales with that whole decision as well. So, and in and of itself, mind you, just so it's documented. Let's just live in a world for a minute where they go to court. I mean, they're going to go to court, but when they get in court, and let's just say that the judge rules that this acquisition cannot happen, and Paramount comes in, provides a deal that WB is more pleased by, and they decide to go with Paramount. I don't like, similar to how with the Rush Hour 4 thing, I do not like that the president of the United States is somehow involved in these decisions. We don't know exactly how much of his involvement is in this whole thing, but I have this weird feeling that it's a part of it in some regard, and I just don't like it. I don't like that is there, and I would not want that, in terms of presenting an acquisition. I would want it that the studio had the capacity to get it, not necessarily that the president had to come in and dictate decisions. Like, no. So we don't know. We don't exactly know what's going to happen. There's people, obviously, the large reaction right now appears to be very negative. And I understand why, because of just the spirit over at Netflix, and especially with that quote that I just told you, consumer friendly, and potentially converting that theatrical model more into a streaming model. That's scary. But this is stuff that will not occur for years. Okay, we have to go through the courts. We have to go through all that stuff, the legality, Trump potentially getting involved in this, maybe. Um, there's all that we have to consider first, right? And that's going to take some time, And once the dust settles, then we'll get an idea of sorts. Once we see it put into action, how Netflix is going to handle all those releases. They are suggesting the kind of nuclear decision, but who knows? Maybe mentalities may change. That's the hope, anyway. But here's the one thing I will also say to finish off the video, that I also feel people are kind of being a little overly dramatic about. One company's decision currently today is not going to affect all the other companies and their mentalities. Okay, we're not in the pandemic, because if you remember the Warner Brothers thing, when it came to HBO Max, when it came to the whole same day release model, which I said in my video about the Netflix deal yesterday. I hope that Netflix is looking at that same day release model that Warner Brothers did and really considering, what could happen if they were to follow suit in that way. I seriously hope that they're considering that, because is that is your template of what happens when you take these major tentpoles and you dump them on streaming. It doesn't work, you know. But back then, during the pandemic, all these studios didn't have a choice, because otherwise they delay their projects and they balloon up into big investments, a la like Mission Impossible most recently, and they guarantee no return on investment, or they put them out now, but they have to figure out some kind of release model because theaters at that time were closed, people weren't going to the theater. So when Warner Brothers rolled out that HBO Max strategy, all the other studios follow suit, because one, all it takes is that one studio to really show, that hey, we're willing to do it, for other studios to then pop up and experiment and try. And it didn't work. It didn't work for them. And that's why they pushed back to theaters. And obviously all the things that happened because of that strategy being in place and streaming taking on the life that it did for a little bit, people just don't really care to go to the theater as often anymore, because of also the pricing of going to the theater and stuff like that, all the stuff that we've talked about before. Um, but the spirit is different now. It's a different landscape. There's no pandemic, or at least, like, it's seasonal, but you know what I'm saying. Like, it's not like as heavy as it once was. You know, so whatever decisions Netflix does with Warner Brothers, that's their game. Okay, that's not going to be everybody else's game. That's just going to be their game, and um, and it doesn't mean that Universal, it doesn't mean that Paramount, it doesn't mean that Disney, it doesn't mean that all these other companies are just going to fall in line, with that mentality, because there's more room to do other things. We're not in the pandemic where these companies essentially had no choice but to do such a thing. Disney and all these other companies can do what they feel is best for their individual companies. If Netflix feels that they have to go the route of doing that streaming model, where they only do it for a few weeks or so, or like a month's time, and then just dump it on streaming, that's their decision making. But that's not everybody's decision making. That's not how every other company is going to think, because they're not in a dire position. They're not in the midst of a pandemic. They have the room to think otherwise. So just so we understand that, because I know I've seen some people thinking that, oh my God, this is going to change the landscape of the industry. In some ways, it might, in terms of just how other companies respond to how Netflix operates with Warner Brothers. But I seriously doubt that it's really going to make that much of an impact in terms of just global scale, in terms of just all of these companies. I don't think it's going to ignite this, like, oh, this passion to do what they did previously during the pandemic. No, I don't think it's going to, because we've proven time and time again that streaming is not valuable yet when it comes to major tentpoles, and never will be at this point, because of just how much it's been integrated into the culture now, and how into society. It's just it's not valuable in that way. So theaters are the only way to secure more profit than on streaming. Yes, streaming is purely the profit of the company, but it's less return, less is made off of there than if you were to go to theaters. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. I know there's a lot of negativity running around right now, and a lot of people that are, disappointed, by this decision. But we have to see it in action. We have to see what their mentalities are going to be. And remember, this is probably like 4 or 5 years from now. Maybe not until like 2030 are we actually going to see what Netflix truly does with Warner Brothers. In those assets that they collected. We don't know yet. We have no idea. Things can definitely change. So, we'll have to wait and see. Maybe things will remain the same. You know, like what he said to what Ted Sarandos, if I think that's Ted Sarandos, what he talked about in regards to distribution in the future, that is scary. that is scary. If that is in fact what will happen in 4 or 5 years down the line, if we do see these very short theatrical windows and then being dumped on streaming, that is scary. And in Warner Brothers' case, they're really stupid if that is the decision that they agreed upon with them, especially considering that they did the HBO Max strategy, which is a very similar rationale and a very similar idea. They had no choice in the matter at the time, I understand. But just given that model and how much that probably put them in debt and kind of leading to certain decisions like splitting the company and amongst all the other releases afterwards that were also failing for them, you would think that they would think otherwise. And that's the hope. That's the hope that maybe Netflix looks at that stuff and changes their attitude about it. But we'll see. We'll see. It's all in time. We'll see how this all fares. That the court is the first thing. We'll see how this all fares in court, and if this acquisition even breaks through. With the Trump administration potentially getting involved, we'll see. We shall see. All we can do is just speculate. But the hope is that they pursue a theatrical slate or extending out their theatrical experience, because that's what they've been wanting to do for a while anyway. Here's your opportunity with this company that you're about to inherit, at least in Pacific Assets. Utilize it in the theatrical manner. Extend out to that, and that's how you can enter the marketplace more securely and more guaranteed. So, because you have more IPs to play with. So it's not just licensing out movies on your streaming platform now. It's now you now have those IPs. Use them. Use them in big ways. Don't just use them to prop up your service. Use them in ways that will also guarantee you money in larger sums in the theatrical medium. Look at Warner Brothers and their HBO Max strategy. It did not work. Don't go that way. It will not work for you. So those are my thoughts on all this with the impact, just kind of giving you the rundown with everything that's been happening. I did my video on yesterday, talking about, that was like my first real response to this, but now it's been a day and just kind of combing through all the information. I just kind of want to just dedicate a whole video to talking about the entire, timeline so far with all this. But you guys let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. What are you guys' thoughts about Netflix buying out Warner Brothers, their assets in the film department, their studio, and this streaming platform? Do you guys think it's a good decision? Do you guys think the mentalities may change? How do you think this is all going to favor in court? Because that's going to be the first obstacle that this acquisition is going to have to get through. You guys let me know all your thoughts in the comment section below. And that's going to be it for this video, guys. Thank you guys for tuning in. And until then, I will catch you guys in the next video. Bye.